Hello, everyone, and welcome to a college football season recap. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and Joe Meade is with me. And today we are doing the Michigan State Spartans in year one with Johnathan Smith. It was good initially, it was bad in the middle, and then it was bad at the end. 5-7 overall in the former Oregon State head coach's first year, 3-6 in the league, and that was good enough for a tied for 12th place finish. But Joe, a really mixed bag from year one and the Spartans. Low expectations going in, a couple of better performances than we expected early on. And then, they hit their lull in the middle of the season towards the second half, and they ultimately end up missing bowl eligibility by just 1 year. But what were your overarching thoughts on the Spartans' 2024 season?
I think going into the year, that was definitely the main goal for Michigan State. I don't know if that was perhaps a fair goal to new coach Johnathan Smith, who came over from Oregon State. I think it was a really young roster. I think, as proven, two of their three main contributors on offense were essentially true freshmen. Aiden Childs had 1 year of experience kind of at Oregon State. Nick Marsh was a superstar in high school and was a superstar his freshman year, but with all the injuries, you take those into account just from game one against FAU. You lose Dylan Tatum from the year after that, who's probably one of the stalwarts of that defense. It looked like it was going to be pretty rough. So I think going in, that was the main goal. But I think, after two humiliating years on and off the field with Mel Tucker, 5-7, 4-8, I think just getting back to a certain brand of football respectability was the main goal. And I think they ultimately achieved that. I don't really question what Smith's tried to build in terms of offense and really in terms of defense, which I thought was pretty stellar most of the year thanks to that D line. But um, Sean, I guess, do you have anything to add to expectations before we go into the schedule?
I think wins loss wise, it's probably ended up where we thought it would, but maybe not the version of this team that ended up being was what we thought. Their personnel outside of the quarterback was a lot better than we thought, and Aiden Childs was probably a little worse than we thought early on. Now he did improve throughout the season. I will give him that. He had some better performances towards the end, but I thought that this was going to be one of the worst rosters in the league at the beginning of the year, and I'm not so sure that ended up being the case. I think they're probably more, maybe not in the middle, but closer to the middle than the bottom. I think that's for sure.
Yeah. I guess with that, Sean, we could go into the first. I mean, the FAU game. I'm just going to look at. I think the biggest takeaway I had was just the injuries. I think game one is kind of like awkward, freshman orientation. So whatever, 16-10. I thought they had chances to lose that game if
A
Cam
lot.
Fincher, yeah, if Cam Fincher, the FAU quarterback, did not if he knew how to throw at certain points, and if his offensive line gave him 1 second, they're probably a play away from losing. But we immediately week two, it starts off with a bang. They went at Maryland. They were not. I think they were 7 point dogs going into that game, and it was really Aiden Childs. He turned the ball over a lot, but you saw what massive potential this guy has. It still has. I don't think he's lost any potential just because he's played one season.
But
You
yeah,
saw Nick.
after the Maryland game, Joe, that was when okay, this team might be a little bit better than we thought.
Yeah, and you saw Nick Marsh was a star. You saw Jack Valley, who we knew would be one of their main contributors, was a problem for defenses, and I think he's going to be a future NFL draft pick. So you think, all right, maybe Michigan State could surprise some people. 2-0. Let's see what they do. They trample Prairie View A&M. They go into this BC game, and although BC's ranked, you think they have a pretty good shot because of the offense. Nick Marsh was out for this game.
They did
You're
end up
kind
having a chance too.
Yeah. Unfortunately, they led 19-16, gave up that last TD, and Aiden Childs, I think he really wants this. If I were to be in his head, I would assume this is one of the top three passes in his season that he would want back. They were driving down the field at the 40-yard line with 41 seconds, threw a ball into double coverage, just trying to make a play, which didn't have to be had. And I think that you chalked it up. That's a freshman QB mistake. And 3-1, I think, they kicked themselves over that game, especially in the context of the season. But they lost to a team that, at that point, a top 25 team, and especially with Castellanos at the time, a team that was rolling. So you kind of just tipped your cap and realized, all right, we're ahead of schedule. This one kind of stinks, but let's see what we could do in the next the next four games, but then you saw the first two of those four, and you go, "Ooh!" So
Yeah.
you
The
see the Ohio State game and the Oregon game. I cut you off, Sean. What were you about to add?
well, I just think that BC game is what they're going to want back. Every team has one. We talked about it in our Michigan preview with the Washington game. This is their Washington game. You had a lot of good chances to win on the road against a team that ended up being bowl eligible and lost their starting quarterback pretty early on after this game. But again, with what was ahead, this losing this one was just a really demoralizing loss for the Spartans. And then I don't think anybody really thought they were going to keep either the Ohio State or Oregon games close. They end up not. And then this Iowa win, Joe, considering the opponents that they played around it, was really important. It kind of knocked Iowa out of the Big Ten race. And considering that they lost the three before it, they lose the three after it, this Iowa game really is going to probably be their standout moment of the year.
Yeah, Sean. And we talked about the Ohio State Oregon game. Overall, not a great performances, but there were points in that Ohio State game, particularly in the first half. They played really well, and I think they're kind of the victim of what a lot of teams nationally are now finding out. Jeremiah Smith's a freak of nature. I thought their defense played respectable enough. It was really the turnovers by Childs, and the Oregon game was the extreme example. Start off the game, get down to the 1 yard line. Childs fumbles there, fumbles again, throws another pick. And that was a game where their defense had a lot of success against Dylan Gabriel. So I do want to highlight those aspects of those games before Michigan State fans just acknowledge that they were helpless against those teams, which at certain points I didn't think they were at all. I thought they were competitive. The Iowa game scared me as a Michigan fan, especially considering they played Michigan the next week. Aiden Childs looked comfortable. He protected the ball. Nate Carter ran the ball superbly well. And, K-Rod Lynch Adams, too. Uh, he carried a majority of the big plays, and Nick Marsh, playmaking ability was on full display against the Iowa team. This was a game people heavily projected Iowa to not really cruise in, but kind of win in a 13-10 kind of way. It was the complete opposite. Michigan State put up 32 clean on Iowa. Special teams clicked. They played really good complementary football, and they made Cade McNamara's life a living hell back there, and probably is what ultimately knocked him out of Division One FBS. That game probably was the end of it. So I thought going into the Michigan game, they had all the momentum in the world. Had the bye week regrouped, beat a really solid Iowa team at the time. And although Michigan was 3.5, 4-point favorites, there was kind of a swagger around this team. I think a lot of the fan base was really confident based on the way Michigan played up to that point, that Michigan State could get it done. Davis Ward was just restarting as the quarterback. And the game started off as well as it could for the Spartans. They missed like a 20-yard field goal to start the game because they false started on fourth down. But go right down, Nate Carter 7-0. Nate Carter the entire game played well enough, but it was just the little mistakes ended up costing Michigan State. That missed field goal came back to bite them. Right before halftime, up 7-6, Aiden Childs fumbled and gave Michigan a 9-7 lead. And from that point, uh, Michigan's offense rolled. They only punted once or twice in the second half. Davis Warren made really good throws, and I thought Michigan State's secondary played well enough, but they couldn't stop that run game of Kalel Mullings and Alex Orchie at certain points. And I thought Childs made enough plays in the second half to give him a chance. Unfortunately, I thought the end of the first half really did them in. But after that game, I knew it was a rivalry game. They had the little fight at the end. I think Johnathan Smith now knows what an intense rivalry it truly is. You think, all right, Indiana, which was a 10.5-point favorite. This is a game Michigan State could probably keep competitive had they played like they did against Michigan and Iowa. To start off 10-0, Nick Marsh makes a circus catcher, thinking, all right, maybe Michigan State can find their groove. And Sean, take it away here. Talk about what happens next.
Well, I just think the Michigan game was unfortunate that they were outplayed by that much by this Michigan team. Like, you would have thought they would have had a chance to win against Michigan this year, and then when Michigan really outplayed them in the second half. And I think that there were a lot of rumors around the fan base in the country that, like, if they can't outplay this Michigan team, like, when is that going to happen? So a little bit of doubt in the dumps there. And Joe, as I did watch this Indiana game from start to finish, and Michigan State was up 10-0 after the first quarter. Their offense looked great, and even that really incredible catch by Nick Marsh. They were driving that then, and they probably would have ended up with a touchdown, either whether he makes that catch or not. But the how they just totally fell apart, being up 10-0 at the end of the first quarter, and then being down double digits at halftime. That is something that is going to have to change from them. I mean, Indiana was a terrific offense all year, but to see a team, there are a lot of teams this year that just folded from the jump and got smoked by Indiana or Oregon or Ohio State and never really showed up to play. They actually did show up to play here and then folded. So, again, sometimes when it's not your day, it's not your day. But when it is your day, at first, you can't lose by 37 points. You can't give up 47 unanswered. Now, I think Indiana deserves a lot of credit there, but again, that game can't go from, we might have a chance here, to 37-point loss.
Yeah, Sean. And, they follow that game up. They have another bye, and you'd think after their first bye, at Illinois, it was a team, again, that won 10 games. You're thinking maybe Michigan State could keep this competitive. And to be fair, they were only down one score most of this game, but the third and fourth quarter, Luke Altmaier dotted them up, and he had an outstanding year, but their receivers were open by, particularly Bryant, were open by an absurd amount of yards.
And at this point in the year, Joe, their defense was decimated with injuries. Mm-hmm. Decimated.
Yeah. And that's another reason why, when I ultimately grade them, I'm not going to be very harsh. To be honest with you, the next week against Purdue, who won, I think, all of one game, Sean, Michigan State deserved to lose that game. Yeah. Purely because of the second half performance. To go up 24-3 and have Purdue drop the game-tying TD on a beautiful throw by Hudson Card, I thought was pretty pathetic. I'm not even going to lie. I don't care how many injuries. You can't have that happen at home.
But you got to give them credit. They did win that Purdue game. They had to, and they had a legit shot of becoming bowl eligible. Joe, hosting a Rutgers team that was around them in the standings at the time, and this is maybe the BC game they'll look back on. We should have had it, but to host another team in the middle of the pack for a chance to go to the bowl, to become bowl eligibility, and to just thoroughly get decimated on your senior day at home, again, that is going to leave a sour taste in many people's mouths. To lose by that 41-14, they lost, and I don't remember if they were slight dogs or slight favorites here, but they had a legit shot to go to a bowl, and they just didn't really show up against a okay to good Rutgers team, and basically they may have been lucky to get that Purdue game, and that sort of play style seemed to go into the next week, and they get blown out by a team that frankly shouldn't have done that to them.
Yeah, Sean, to be honest with you, only needing two of after the Iowa game, at 4-3, they only needed to win 2 of their last 5, and I thought they would really get it at the time. But Rutgers, similar to Illinois game, they were competitive for like a good quarter and a half, and then they just fell apart. The late turnover where they couldn't score a TD, the early second quarter turnover led to Rutgers just steamrolling them. Kyle Monungai ran all over them. Athan Kalakmanis had a field day, and again, I'm going to be very fair to Michigan State's secondary. Those guys should not have been out there that early, or in those situations where they had to carry the defense, because Rutgers D-line quickly took Michigan State's defensive line out of the game with the quick passes and the runs to the side. So I think, if I had to summarize this schedule recap, just to schedule missed opportunities, maybe not so much even wins. Aside from the BC game, that was the only game, that was a true toss-up. I thought Michigan outplayed them, and I don't think Michigan State necessarily got unlucky in that game, although there were a few calls I could see them disputing, like the targeting early in the fourth quarter. I completely understand the outrage there. But overall, Sean, you had a chance. You had to win 2 of your last 5, couldn't get it done. And now you look at year 1, 5-7. You do have some optimism. They have transfers in the portal. Aiden Childs is back. I know a lot of the fans were mad at some of his comments. I think if he hones the turnover issue, which I know is a big if, I think he is true force. He could run, he could throw. I think his year one, perhaps similar to Michigan in a sense, that could be fertilizer for a really good 25 and 26 campaign. You bring Jack Velen back. I know you do lose Nate Carter, but you add another good back in the portal. You add some defensive, some you add a lot of names in the portal for the O line and the secondary, two positions I thought were really under siege for most of the year. So I don't think it's all doom and gloom for Michigan State. I know October and November put a really bad October 26th on put a really bad taste in Michigan State fans' mouths, but I don't really think it's a cause for overreaction for the overall program.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's on the right path. It probably went about what we expected overall. Obviously, there are some highs that were probably a little bit higher than we thought, and then the lows were pretty low. So I'm going to give them a C plus, Joe. I just think that for me, the way that I'm doing this is C. You got to take everything into account. They still had a shot to go to a bowl. They didn't get it. They weren't competitive with the elite teams in the league, and they lost to their rival, and they barely beat the bottom dwellers. Like, I think C plus might be a little on the harsh side, but they're still, they still could have been better.
Yeah, Sean, I'm gonna be similar. I'm gonna give them a C minus, and that's not a failing grade. That's still a passing grade.
Yeah, C is meet expectations.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I'm doing it.
The only reason it's slightly below expectations is just some of the performances in the wins, particularly the Purdue and FAU, just grading in totality. The FAU game, I thought they could have slammed the door very early in the second quarter. That's something they're going to have to do. Not that they were going to slam the door on Indiana, Michigan, or Oregon, where they had ample periods where they were playing better.
They could have stayed in the game for a little bit.
Yeah, just staying in the game. I think that's one thing that disturbed a lot of Michigan State fans. That kind of gave a familiarity with the last 2 years of the Mel Tucker era, where in 22 and 23 they'd be losing by 20 at halftime and half the stadium would be empty. I think Michigan State fans are sick and tired of seeing that, and frankly, I think they have every right to be sick and tired. This is a program that has competed nationally in the past with Mark D'Antonio. Resources are there. I don't think Michigan State fans are going to overreact, saying I don't think they'll be a perennial powerhouse similar to like an Ohio State, Georgia, Michigan, or LSU, or even like an LSU level where that amount of money and resources poured into it. But this is a team I think that could finish top 4 or 5 in the conference, every other year on a consistent basis. I think they have really good pieces for next year, whether that's Velling, Marsh, or Childs. I think Alex Van Subert on the D line is going to be a really key returnee for his senior season. I think another year in this system overall for these guys is going to be really good. I think recruiting wise is the main concern, which in modern football is not a huge deal with the transfer portal. I think that's the only off-season aspect I could pick apart with Johnathan Smith, but he's won at Oregon State with less talent. I'm not going to really judge the guy too harshly for going 5-7 in what turned out to be the toughest conference in the country.
So, Joe, I'm going to end up saying that I do think that the record was probably fair, maybe even a little bit generous. But they end up, like you said, there were some close games.
They're 4.5 over-under to start the year.
So they end up just getting over. They probably were lucky to get 5. Yeah, they had 1 game that they lost they could have won. They had 2 that they won that they should have lost. So, again, looking at that, probably a fair overall record. And long term, I agree, Joe. There's like Michigan State should make the college football playoff like once out of every 5 or 6 years. I mean, there's 12 teams. Again, if that changes, then it's a different story. But they should have a team every once in a while good enough to make it. They're just too big of a fan base, a brand, and while they still might be a basketball school, they did make the 4-team once, right?
Yeah, they made it in 2015. Connor Cook, L.J. Scott, Burgess, so Aaron Burbridge.
So it is possible for this team to
1,000%
to take the next step, get 7 or 8 wins next year, get to a bowl, get to maybe beat one ranked team, and then I think maybe 2 years from now is where they look for that 10-win total. But again, I think overall they were pretty close to expectations. They weren't very high. I think the stock is at least not going down for Johnathan Smith after year one. It's probably going slightly up.
No, and I think in terms of next year, I think you're spot on, Sean. I think just the continued development of Aiden Childs, I think you could still have him in your program until about 2027. Should he not go to the NFL by then? And what's crazy, if he goes completely off next year, he's 3 years removed from high school. He could go to the draft. I don't foresee that. Not really doubting him.
And he does have
Just
3 years left?
yeah, he
Okay.
does.
So I
Yeah.
think Aiden Childs year 4 is when this thing's all going to come together, if, it gets there.
Yeah, I think by 2027, I think that's when you really start thinking playoff or bust, which might sound crazy right now because they're coming off a 5-7 year. But next year, I think the main goal should be 7 or 8 wins. I think with that schedule, it's pretty workable. I know everyone wants to beat Michigan, and I think it's very possible. That game, you know, as proven this year, rivalry football is rivalry football.
And
Never count them
they're
out.
hosting it too.
Mhm.
They are going to Bloomington in their other rivalry
Yeah.
game. So
Just candidly, Sean, at USC, at Nebraska, you know, at Iowa, Penn State, those are 5 games that are not immediately losses, but I doubt they'll be favorites in those 5. So, if you pull one of those off, even if you lose like an unexpected one, such as a BC, such as a UCLA, who again, it's going to be a really interesting grade too. I think that would be progress. Anything 7+ wins as of today, I think Michigan State fans not necessarily should be screaming for the Raptors, but I think could see a steady surge to going back to where they were in the glory years of Mark D'Antonio, 2010 to 2015.
it's all about continuous improvement for them. And as long as there's a step in the right direction, I think there's reason to be optimistic long term for Michigan State. All right, Joe. Well, that's all we have for them today. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to this season recap. Please check out the other ones we're going through. All the Big Ten teams, maybe a couple others too. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.